And now we're good. Okay. So, intro to Mocha and Chai. All right, so first I just want to talk a little bit about testing and the motivation behind testing. And I want to talk about definitions. So unit testing is testing each individual feature. So right now this guy is unit testing, does this lock work? Great. And then integration testing is do the pieces work together, right? So the little bolt lock works just fine. It like slides in and you can, open it and close it, but it doesn't keep the door from opening. So that would be integration testing to see whether it works with the other components. Mocha and Chai are largely used for unit testing. Okay, and just the benefits in general for automated testing. Let's say you have a huge application, right? Facebook or Twitter or, Pinterest or whatever, millions of lines of code. You want to be able to make aggressive changes, put in a feature that is going to touch every bit of your application, and you want to be able to feel confident that you haven't broken anything. Automated testing really helps with that. If you have your tests well designed and they cover all of your code, you can feel good that if you make a change and then you run your tests and they all pass, that your code is in good shape. And automated testing obviously is more human hour efficient than manual testing. It is also generally more comprehensive, right? If you are just a person doing all of the testing, it's quite possible you're going to miss something. Often people will have what's called continuous integration. So there are things like Travis, where when you push to GitHub, it'll run all of your tests automatically, and it will alert you if any of them fail. Also, but another thing to think about is sometimes if you have, the larger your application is and the more tests you have, the longer the tests are going to take to run. So you can imagine a project that is so big that its tests take like 45 hours to run, right? And you don't want to do that every time you're pushing to GitHub. So often the tests are broken up. They're sort of parallelized so that they can be run on a bunch of separate computers, and it'll only take like, let's say 1 hour to run the tests, to run them all in parallel. Not all of the tests in parallel, but pieces of them in parallel. Okay, so that's just sort of a motivation for testing. For any modern software company, you are going to be expected to write unit tests. The place that I worked at before this, we talked about testing and we taught people how to do testing, but we didn't really emphasize testing. And that's one thing that I think is really great about the Learners Guild is when you're starting in phase 1 and you're doing testing. Testing is part of coding. Writing unit tests is part of being a developer. Just the way it is. All right, questions on testing in general before we move on.
What's the name of that program you need to run tests automatically?
Oh, Travis. Yeah, Travis. Yeah, and so on, I have a personal project, and I have Travis on that, and Travis. So another thing Travis can do, if we go to so you can put links in your READMEs. Let's go to my profile. All right, so this is my personal project. It's kind of a planetarium application. It gives you the stars and the planets, and at any point, any time, any place on Earth. So, but one thing that I do is I have in the README, I have a link to Travis, and it just, every time I push, it runs all my tests, and then if they all pass, I get this build passing. So, and then I get a build failed, which is really embarrassing. But I do have to say that this, as long as I'm giving anecdotal testing stuff, this actually was incredibly helpful to me. When I was just developing this application on my laptop, everything worked fine. And then when I deployed it on an AWS server, one of the modules I was using, one of the libraries I was using in Python, used too much memory for my AWS instance. And like either I had to pay more money to get more memory, or I had to use something else, right? And so I switched to use something else. And all of a sudden my tests started failing, which was weird because I could actually, if I could actually use the application locally on my machine just fine, but my tests started failing, and it's because there were some timing issues with the thing that I replaced it with. But I did not find those timing issues with my manual testing. Everything on my own computer, when it was all self-contained, worked really fast. But when it was being tested on the cloud with Travis, my tests started failing. And it's something that I never would have found on my own. Testing actually was incredibly helpful to me to find what was going on. So I ended up using a third solution that actually both passed the tests and used an appropriate amount of memory. So, because just the second solution was just flaky. It just, it took a long time and sometimes didn't work. Yeah. Okay, so back to Mocha and Chai. All right, so Mocha, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Mocha and Chai separately, and then I'll talk about how they integrate together. So Mocha is a JavaScript testing framework. It's a way to organize your unit tests in JavaScript. Unit tests meaning testing just a small piece of functionality of your software. Okay, so you remember from, I think it was Friday, we were talking about, you do your npm install. What does the --save-dev do? Do you guys remember?
Package JSON file.
Nice. It puts it in your package.json file for your development dependencies. Why are we doing save dev instead of just save? Yeah, just to run the app. You're never going to do tests, right? When you go onto the web and you use Facebook, you're not running Facebook's tests, right? You're just using Facebook. It's only developers who are going to be running the tests. Yeah, great. Yeah, Brittany.
So in the file, then it would only, if you do save dev, it'll just put it in the JSON file
It'll put it under dev dependencies in the file. And so when somebody does an npm install from your package.json, you can specify, there are flags. You can specify whether you want to install for a development environment or whether you just want to install for a production environment. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to, is that big enough? Without a frown, so I'm going to just make it a little bigger. Okay, so we have makedir Mocha, and check this out. This is something that as an instructor, bites me a lot. So if I do an npm install save dev Mocha, it's going to give me an error, or at least I expect it to. It might. Oh, I didn't do an npm init first, so that's why. Notice I didn't do an npm init, but it actually did make a node modules and a package lock. But it's like there's actually no there's no place for it to do the save dev. There's no package.json, so it will do this for you if you don't do an npm init. But it's not how you want to be running your projects. So I'm just going to remove all of that. And now I'm going to do an npm init first. And if you do an npm init -y, that means just accept all of the stuff and don't make me hit return for every time. So, all right, now my package is named Mocha. And now this is where I'm going to start to have trouble. If I try and do an npm install save dev Mocha, it won't install a package with the name Mocha under a package that's already called Mocha. So it called it Mocha because that's the name of my directory, but then it's just getting confused. So I'm going to change it to Mocha demo. What am I using here? Yeah, or VI, yeah. Escape :WQ is always good. Okay, and now let's try that save dev again, and now it should work. All right, now sometimes it's hard to see what was the errors before, but this is the one right here. I got some warnings that I have no description and no repo field in my package.json, but so I'm just atoming this directory, and if we look at the package.json, it now has a dev dependency of Mocha. Cool. What was the package lock.json again? Exact version numbers of everything that I'm using. And why does it have more than just Mocha in here? All I did was install Mocha. Mocha has its own dependencies. When I installed Mocha, it installed all of these things. Okay, cool. So, great. So let's, all right, so that, we got through one line of that slide. Let's, okay. Then to run the tests, you run Mocha, and then the file name that, that contains your tests. Now, when you do this, notice we're using Mocha to run the file name and not Node. When you use Mocha, you are going to get these globals. These, you're going to get a global called describe. You're going to get a global called it, and you're going to get more globals. But today we're just going to talk about describe and it. Yeah.
Is it colon connector?
No, actually, that's a great question. So no, that was just me saying that's what happens. Yeah, I'm removing the colon. Thank you for asking that. Other questions? So describe and it help you to structure your tests. That's basically what you're getting when you get Mocha, are these describe and it and these other globals that we'll talk about sometime in the future. And then, and of course, we'll talk about how you use describe and it in a minute, but it is also common to run Mocha with no arguments. And what that does is that looks for a test.js in the current directory. And if there is a test.js, it'll just run it. Or if it finds a directory called test, it'll run all of the JS files in that test directory and any subdirectories of that test directory. So you can imagine that Facebook as an application has more than one test file, right? Like if it just had one test file, it would be millions of lines long, and you would never be able to find anything in it, right? So you probably are going to, for an application of any size, you're going to have a test suite, and you're going to have you're going to break it out into files for organization. Yeah, Brittany.
So, if I understand that, is that an either or both? Like,
you know, I haven't tried it if there's a test.js and a test directory. I'm guessing it would do both, but it would be kind of a weird way to structure your tests to have both a test.js and a test directory. So that's more of a academic question than like a real life question. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about this describe and this it. So basically, it's a hierarchy. You're going to have a bunch of its underneath a single describe. But you might have a bunch of describes in your test file. Describe in general is going to you're going to have a describe for a feature or a function. And you're going to have it for some aspect that you want to test about that feature or function. So let's see. So here, let's say I have this describe add. So the function that I'm looking at is add. And notice describe takes two arguments. It takes a string, which in this case is my add function. I just, and you don't have to put the parentheses here. I just did to indicate it's a function. And the second one is a function. So I have an anonymous function here. And that function contains two lines of code. One is, they're both its. And this is actually not right. I just had a little syntax error there. I had a space after the it. So, my first it is saying it should add positive numbers. And see how how the English kind of flows. It should add positive numbers. Okay. And each of the its has two arguments too. A string and a function. And right now, I'm really not doing anything in the function. I'm saying basically if I add 2 and 3 and it doesn't equal 5, then I want to do something, right? But I'm not going to talk about what that is yet. And if I'm adding negative numbers, if I add -3 and -4 and it doesn't equal 7, then I want to do something. I want the test to fail. Okay, so let's actually put this together. So I'm going to make a new file, and if I want to run Mocha without giving it a file name, what should I call this file? Test.js. Well, you did not copy what I asked you to copy. It is on my list, and as you might imagine, I'm pretty busy, especially with Justin away, but it's on my list to have a better way of doing these lectures so I don't have to keep on doing stuff like this. Anyway, okay. So here's my test.js file. And didn't I save that? Okay. So great. Now, if I run this with Node, if I do node test.js, it's going to be like, what is describe? What is it? They're not defined anywhere. But if I run it with Mocha, Mocha defines those globals for me. Now, I do have a problem because I have this add function, which doesn't exist. Presumably, that's the function that I'm trying to test. So I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it add.js. And I'm going to okay, so basically I'm making this add function. I'm just returning the sum of whatever the two numbers are. And if I want to be able to access this add function from my test.js, what do I have to do? Export it. Yeah, and how do I do that? What does the syntax look like? I can do that because I'm only exporting one thing. If I were exporting multiple things, I would want to make an object. I'm only exporting one thing, so I can do this. Okay, so let's go back to test.js. And now how do I get that add inside this test.js? You need to give it a path, otherwise it's going to look in the node modules. And I need to save it somewhere. Yeah, it's nice. Good question. Yeah, it is actually, you're right. It's more common not to not do JS. Either way works. Yeah, you know, I'm new to Node, so I actually don't have a good question or a good answer on best practices. In Python, you can't use the extension. It will be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, in Node, clearly I have been using the extension just because it's like if I'm given a path to the file, I might as well give the actual path to the file. Yeah, so if you don't give the extension, I'm assuming it looks for things like, you know, other JavaScript-like extensions like, you know, .jsx or you know, whatever. But yeah, good question. Okay, so all right, so now I should be able to run this file. Okay, so I'm just going to run. So now I have this test.js, and if I just run Mocha, it's going to run the test.js. Both of my tests pass. Well, that's awesome. So, and notice it gives me this nice hierarchy. Add. Should add positive numbers, should add negative numbers. But if let's say I change this to, I'm expecting add to equal 6. Yeah, both of my tests still pass, right? Because I'm not actually doing anything here yet. What do I need to do to make my tests fail? And the answer is you have to throw an error. So Mocha is going to run each of these its, and it's going to look and see whether an error was thrown. If an error is thrown, the test fails. No errors thrown, the test passes. Unless you're explicitly looking for errors to be thrown, there are ways to do that, but for now we're going to go with the simple. Error thrown, test fails. No error thrown, test passes. Okay, so here now I have in my in my condition, I'm actually going to throw an error if I get a response that's different from what I expected, or an output that's different than what I expected. All right, so now I'm going to take this and put it in here. And I was on the slide, I needed to save lines, but here I'll make it a little bit easier to read. So if you add 2 and 3 and you don't get 5, then throw an error saying positive numbers failed. If you add -3 and -4 and you don't get -7, then throw an error saying negative numbers failed. So now, if I run the tests, what are we going to expect if I run the tests? They're both going to pass, right? Because my add function is good and it actually adds numbers, and it's never going to actually throw these errors. So let's run the tests. They both pass. Great add function. I can try and make one of them fail. So now I have a test that I expect to fail. It's a good idea to check and make sure that your test fails when you expect it to, especially with JavaScript asynchronicity. Sometimes things don't work exactly how you expect them to. So now what's going to happen is add 2 and 3 is not going to equal 6. So it is going to throw the error. And Mocha is going to interpret that as a failed test. So tells me that should add positive number failed. And basically, it just shows me that the error was that positive numbers failed. And that's the error that I threw here. If I said error Mondays are hard. It's just going to say Mondays are hard. All right, questions on Mocha? Cool. So let's continue. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Mocha's job is to take tests that you've written and execute them. Yeah. Confirmatory questions are great as you're processing, totally. Okay, good. Now we're moving on to chai. So this is all in the hot drink category, right? Because Java is like coffee, so then Mocha and then chai. So an assertion library. All right. So chai provides 3 things for us. It provides assert, expect, and should. I'm not going to talk about should here. Some people do not like should, including Jared, by the way, because it actually changes basic prototype. It adds a method on every single object called should, which is a little hacky and a little uncomfortable. Assert and expect are cleaner. Monica, do you have something to add?
I was just discussing my preference for expect.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Well, then I looked up and I was like, that's exactly why I like it. It's more human readable.
Yeah.
For me, means I make less errors in writing tests.
Mm.
And I know that you can chain it. I didn't know that you could do that with assert or should. I haven't used those are other.
I think you probably can assert. You can chain with should. You probably can, but you can't chain with assert. You cannot chain with assert.
So yeah, all the more reason. I was just expressing my
Yeah.
agreement with what you were saying.
Awesome. So just for posterity, Monica prefers expect because it's more readable, and that leads to fewer errors when writing tests. Cool. Thanks, Monica. Okay, so both of them throw errors, and so this is why you use chai with Mocha, right? Because Mocha is expecting things to throw errors when tests don't pass, or Mocha determines whether or not tests pass by whether or not errors are thrown. And chai throws errors. And chai throws errors in really beautiful, helpful ways. Chai does not throw errors that say Mondays are hard if your addition doesn't work, right? It is very, very descriptive if your tests fail. So we'll take a look at that. Yeah, and so assert is more basic and less English-like. Some people like asserts because it's very clean. You have a very limited repertoire of things that you can use, which sometimes just makes it easier to determine the right thing to use. Here at Learners Guild, I think almost everybody uses expect, but you can be the exception if you prefer assert. So yeah, and you can chain them, meaning you can expect something to be a string, and then you can also expect it in the same line to equal hello. The documentation I've linked to here. The documentation is super good, and you should make friends with it. But just to see, so here's the should, and here's what I was saying where should. So foo is just an object, and foo now has the method should, which is kind of a it's basically altering all of your objects. A little uncomfortable. Here, expect takes an item, and then you say, I expect whatever it is to be a string. Now we're looking at type. Or to equal bar. Or to have length of 3. So all of this is in the documentation. And again, you should, when you're doing your testing and you're first starting out, you should just have the chai documentation open and just, keep looking at it. We'll look at the expect guide in a minute. And here's this chaining. Expect T to have property flavors. That's like a key, T is probably an object that has a property flavors with length of 3. Now we're expecting that property flavors to have a length of 3. That's the chaining. Yeah, it'll specify if it throws an error, which one of those it doesn't meet. Okay, so so here's expect. I don't want just a short little thing. I want all the expect documentation. So I'm going to go up here for the API documentation and expect and should. Now I'm seeing to be, been, is that, which does, and then not, and deep. We'll talk about deep in a minute, and nested and own. Okay, this is more what I want to see. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's rewrite our other tests using expect. Okay, so first I have to install chai. It doesn't come for free. So I am going to do an npm install save dev chai. Okay, great. So now I have chai, And if I look at my package.json, now I have two dev dependencies, Chai and Mocha. And then, okay, and so now up here, I'm going to say const expect equals require Chai. Here I'm not giving a path because I'm just requiring a built-in module, so it knows to go into my node modules and find it. Require Chai returns an object that has a lot of things on it, including assert and expect and should. And I just want the expect, the value that's at the expect key. Okay, so now instead of my conditional here, I'm going to say expect add to 3 to equal 5. It's a little less, I don't know, spelled out what's happening, but it's pretty nice to read. Okay, let's see what happens if I do Mocha. It passes, okay. What's really interesting is when it doesn't pass. Okay, it expected 5, we'll talk about deeply in a minute, it expected 5 to equal 6. The expected is green, the actual is red. Super helpful. So EQL is deep equal, and we'll talk about in a minute. You could also do this. I just made it 7, which okay is still gonna fail, and that's the not deep equal. And we'll talk about. I'm used to doing EQL, but we'll talk about deep equal in just a minute. All right. So and then. Okay, how's Chai? Good. Kelsey, Brittany, any questions?
So you run your test to a row. So if you add try, you can be a little more sophisticated.
Yeah, exactly. Your way of throwing errors becomes both more readable on this end and less work for you, and you get a lot better information on this end.
I just want to just a basic thing.
Yeah.
The const add.
Yeah.
Statement, that brings in, like, now you can refer to add the function that's within the file add.js.
Yeah, and it's because, hold on, you guys are probably realizing I am not a command line wizard. So can we do that? Okay. So here I did a module.exports on add, and I just exported the one thing. I didn't export an object, which is why this is now not going to return an object. It's just going to return that add function.
And if you did, you were talking, I think it was you said tweak that. You can put the whole thing, like you can put that add.js file, like say you had multiple functions.
Mm-hmm.
Put all those functions in the
Yeah, so let's say, well, the way you would put it in an object. So if I said, then I could do like this, and this is an object, and I'm just using the shorthand. I want the key to be add and the value to be whatever the value of my variable add is. And now I can't do this. Now now add is going to be this entire object, which is not what I want. I either want to say it's this object dot add, or I can also say find the thing with the key add and make it the value add in this file. Oh, then I can do add, comma, subtract.
Is there any way to do it like what if you have hundreds of functions?
Then you probably would want to say const add, and now add is a really bad name for this file because, so I'll say const operations is require add.js, and then down here, I would use something shorter. So I'm gonna say ops, and then I would say, if I wanted to use add, I would say ops.add down here.
So that would require the whole, all of the functions. Or,
Yeah, so basically I'm saying ops is whatever object I exported here,
okay,
and then you can just access the keys, like so. Cool, other questions? All right, let's talk about that deep equal that I was referring to before. Whenever you are testing object literals or arrays, you are going to want to use deep equal. And the reason is this will check all of your keys and values recursively. It's a little bit complicated why you need to do this. But if you don't use the deep equal, it's going to check to see whether the two things you're talking about actually take up the same space in memory, which is not what you want. You just want to know if their keys and values are the same. So let's go over here and panes, close pane. Okay, cool. So here I'm going to do another describe because I'm actually going to be testing something else. And I'm just going to be testing deep equal, although really in theory you'd be testing a feature or function of your own, right, that you've written, because that's what you're doing. You test your own code. You figure that Mocha and Chai, don't need to be tested, but this is just for our practice. So remember, the first one is a string, and the string is what's going to be shown at this level. So the first one is a string, the second one is a function. And I am going to, just for now, I'm going to say my object is going to represent my cat Cisco. So I'm going to say name Cisco, age 17, no, she's 18, and color black and white. Okay, so that's Cisco, and I'm not being consistent with my quotes. Okay. And so if I say expect, actually, let's call that Cisco. And if I say expect Cisco to equal. Now remember, when I spell it out, it's not the deep equal. And I'm going to just give something that looks a lot like Cisco. Oh, I need to do an it here. So I'm going to say it compares Cisco successfully. And again, another function. The it is what's going to run and look for errors to be thrown. That I need to put the it in order for it to run something and look for errors to be thrown. Okay, so right now I just made a constant, and I'm expecting that constant to equal something that looks pretty much exactly like it. Okay, so I'm going to Mocha. I have a syntax error on line 18. Line 18. Okay, I finished the function, but I did not finish the parentheses that were containing the arguments for my describe. Let's try again. Okay, and notice, even though they look exactly the same, those two Ciscos are not equal. Objects are not equal unless they're pointing to exactly the same place in memory, and I actually have two different objects here. So instead, I think it's deeply, let's try that. When you put the deeply in, you're like, I don't care whether the objects are in the same place in memory. I want you to compare all of the keys and values, which is almost always what you want to do. Okay, so I tried deeply, and it was like, look at how helpful Chai is. Like, what a champ. I'm just trying to be grammatically correct, but apparently apparently Chai is not. Okay, now it's passing.
So if you had some function that took a reference to a thing, did some work within the object it was referencing, and then passed back that reference, even though the object itself has changed, you can still compare that you have the right reference on the thing.
Yeah, I believe so. I actually haven't studied Chai well enough to know to say absolutely for sure, but that would be my understanding at this point in time. Yeah, the question was, for those of you watching at home, the question was, if you were just passing a reference to an object and then returning that reference from your function, should you be able to use equal and not deeply equal to make sure that the object that you pass to the function is the same as the reference that you returned? That was the question. Okay. So, cool. And then I can make deeply equal fail by changing one of the properties, or deep equal, sorry. Now it fails. And look at how helpful, right? It told me exactly which property was different. All right, questions on deep equal? Yeah.
You can just use EQL.
Yeah, you can just use EQL instead of deep equal. So let me just make sure that's true. But I think so based on what I was seeing before. So let's make this back to something that we would expect to pass. And yes, so the EQL, if you want to save yourself characters, EQL is a shortcut for deep equal. Apparently I was feeling corny on Friday. Mocha and Shy, what a great team. Exactly, James. Since I have a few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about the how we would make the test script in package.json. So right now, notice that by default, npm init says it just prints no test specified and exits. So if I did npm test, because remember, you don't have to put run if it's one of the built-in keywords. So npm test, all I get is no test specified, whatever. And then because it did an exit 1 and not an exit 0, because it did an exit 1 and not an exit 0, that exit 1 is like your tests failed. So because the npm test checks to see what the exit code is, and anything other than 0 is a failure code. So what we can do instead is we can just put Mocha here. And then we can do npm test. It's going to run our tests. Oh, and something I meant to point out before, notice because we have 2 describes now, each describe gets its own sort of outdented, it gets its own major heading, and then the its underneath each describe get their own kind of minor heading. Now, right now, it doesn't look like I've gained anything, because before I just had to type Mocha, and now I have to type npm test. So like, how is that good? But often what you will do, and we'll talk about this in a future testing lecture, but you will make an environment variable that determines whether you're testing or not. So that in your code, you can check what your environment variable is, and if your environment variable says you're testing, you'll do one thing. And your environment variable says you're not testing, it will do another thing. And so you can do things like use a different database if you're testing or not testing. Or in your case, since you're not doing so much with databases in phase 1, use a different JSON file if you're testing or not testing. If you're not testing and you're in production, you're going to use your production JSON file, the one that actually holds your to-do list. But if you're testing, you're going to use your test JSON file so that your tests, first of all, don't pollute your production to-do list. You don't want to like put a bunch of tests in your production to-do list. And also so that you have a very well-known state of your test file. And because when you're testing, you want complete control. You don't want to have a production test file that somebody might have put like walk the dog and get dinner in. You want to have a file that has exactly all this well-known stuff in it. So often what you'll do is you'll do export. You'll remember from our shell talk, this is how you make a new environment variable or change an existing environment variable. And node env is a common one to use. So now what it's going to do is before you test, it is going to make an environment variable called node env, or it's going to update one if it already exists. It's going to set the value to be test. The and means wait for the first command to finish and don't move on if the first command fails. So first do this. When it has successfully passed, then run Mocha. So now, if I have an environment variable, so let's go back into my test.js. I'm going to just do something in here. I'll say if, and I look at environment variables by using process.env. So process.env is an object that represents all of my environment variables. If it's test, and right now I'm just going to say console log testing, else console log not testing. But in your actual tests, you would do things like set what database you're using or set what JSON file you're using.
Would you do that in each test?
No, you would probably do it at the top. Yeah, but depending, it depends. But yeah, you probably would do it at the top. Or at the beginning of your describe, or possibly in a before each, or whatever. But yeah, probably at the top usually. So for Miles's question, I'll do that up here. So now, if I do Mocha, I just did Mocha, and why? Let's see. Oh, node-env is test. I'm not sure why. Let me set node-env equal to production. Fine. So node-env is just equal to production. That's sort of, or usually, or it wouldn't even exist, right? So now if I just do Mocha, notice it's not testing because node-env is not equal to test. But if I do npm test, and I have a feeling, by the way, this is equal to test from this shell has been open for weeks, and it's probably just something I did like a long time ago in this shell. So now if I do an npm test, the first thing it does is it sets node-env to test, and then it runs Mocha. And now it knows that I'm testing. So if I echo node-env, it's back to prod. It doesn't change what it is permanently. That was a little bit of more advanced stuff for the end of the lecture, a little bit for the benefit of the phase 2 people who came and sat in the back. But I plan on doing more advanced testing lectures, and I'll go over that again in more advanced testing lectures. Okay, any questions before we finish? Oh, is he? Perfect. Okay. All right, great. Enjoy your day. Come to me with your testing questions.